Welcome back to my channel. I'm Sammy Simple, and today's video is going to be a little bit of a mashup of facts and history and true crime. So, hold on to your seat. Is that the right word? Hold on to your butts. Whatever. So, I'm not sure what I'm going to title this video to encapsulate all of those things, but I'm sure I'll figure it out. First of all, though, I'm going to have some coffee. I got this at the store today. La Colombe coffee, double shot, draft, latte, foamy nitrous infused milk, cold brew. It was like $3, which is pretty much what like my coffee order costs. Whoa. Starting out with a bang here, and I'm gonna put it in my I can't tell if this thing is a cat mug or if it's a hedgehog. Uh-oh, there's Sheila. Sheila is now with us. Hopefully she will lie down and chill out. There you go, Shishi. She had a rough day yesterday. Take her to the bed again because her ears were itchy, but no infection. They just think that she has a food allergy, so now we have to rule out a bunch of foods, whatever. So, anything for you, Shishi, because we love you. Okay, so today's video is going to be about DNA testing and kind of the history of it. And then I'm going to talk about, I think, 4 or 5 cases where DNA testing helped exonerate people who were in prison for crimes that they did not commit. I got most of the information from the Innocence Project. I'm going to be reading a lot of this for you, but I find it to be very interesting, and I think it's kind of a good, what's the word, compromise, you know. I said I was taking a break from true crime, but this is the kind of true crime that I can manage right now, so I hope you enjoy it. Let's get right into a little timeline as it is used in the criminal justice system. So, in 1953, scientists James Watson, Francis Crick, Maurice Wilkins, and Rosalind Franklin each helped discover the double helix of DNA as we know it today. Can you imagine how exciting that must have been for them? I bet they went out and got a couple drinks after that to celebrate. 1984, British geneticist Alec Jeffrey was the first person to use DNA profiles or DNA fingerprint tests that are now used around the world to resolve questions of paternity and solve crimes. I just think that she loves when I do ASMR. Okay, so in 1986, Alec Jeffrey's DNA method is used in court to exclude a teenage boy who falsely confessed to 2 rapes in England, and they used the DNA to identify the actual guilty party. In 1987, Tommy Lee Andrews is the first person convicted of a crime based on DNA evidence, so he wasn't exonerated. Life Codes Incorporated involved 3 DNA samples, one from the rapist semen, one from the blood of the victim, and one from blood taken from Mr. Andrews after his arrest. Using graphs and charts, Michael Baird, a senior scientist at Life Codes, and David Hausman, a research biologist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, testified that the DNA in the semen and in Mr. Andrews' blood matched. The defense attorney, Hal Uhrig, argued that the tests were unreliable and that there were not enough checks and balances to prevent shoddy lab work. He said he would appeal the verdict on that basis. Assistant State Attorney Tim Berry said the tests have proved effective for 10 years in paternity cases and could make convictions of rapists easier. He said there was a 1 in 10 billion chance that 2 people would have the same DNA fragments. So in 1989, Gary Dotson becomes the first person in the United States to be exonerated of a crime by DNA evidence. The following information is from the National Registry of Exonerations. On the night of July 9th, 1977, a police patrol officer came across a 16-year-old girl named Kathleen Crowell standing beside a road not far from a shopping mall in Homewood, a suburb of Chicago, where she worked at a fast food restaurant. She told the officer that she had been raped. He took her to a hospital where they found some cuts on her stomach. Her underwear was preserved as evidence. Based on the photo identification, Gary Dotson was arrested and charged with rape. Crowell's in-court identification of him was the principal evidence at Dotson's trial, and he was convicted in July 1979 and sentenced to an indeterminate term of 25 to 50 years in prison. In 1982, Crowell married. In 1982, Kathleen Crowell married a man named David Webb, and they moved to Jaffrey, New Hampshire. In early 1985, Kathleen Crowell Webb, as she now had changed her name, told her pastor that she was feeling extremely guilty about something, and that something was that she had fabricated a rape allegation and had sent an innocent man to prison. She added that she had actually cut her own stomach and torn her clothing to fortify the false claim. She said that she did this because she was afraid that if she got pregnant by her boyfriend, she would be in trouble. So for some reason, she decided to fabricate this story of being raped. 16-year-old girls do crazy things. This is a little out of the realm of crazy normal. But she finally decided to come forward and recant her testimony. So her attorney contacted the prosecutors about her recantation, but they were not interested in retrying or revisiting the case, and they claimed that she was lying about lying. So her lawyer ended up giving the story to a reporter in Chicago who broke the story on March 2nd, 1985. In 1987, a defense attorney, Thomas Breen, agreed to take Dotson's case. He had heard of DNA testing in England and immediately asked Governor Thompson to order DNA testing. On August 15, 1988, a California forensic serotologist reported that his tests positively excluded Dotson and positively included Webb's former boyfriend, which corroborated her story that she lied, that she had had sex with her boyfriend but was afraid she'd become pregnant, so she lied about carrying. The results were confirmed by Illinois State Police Crime Laboratory. Despite the definitive DNA result, it took an entire year until August 14, 1989, for the prosecution to finally admit the error. It was not until January 9th, 2003, that Dotson won a pardon based on his innocence. On August 25th, 2003, the Illinois Court of Claims awarded him $120,000 for his wrongful conviction, and the only other compensation he received was from Webb, his accuser, who gave him $17,000. In 1986, which were profits that she earned from a book about her story entitled Forgive Me, so at least she tried to make it right. In 1990, we're moving back to our forensic timeline now. The FBI introduces a 14-state pilot DNA database, which would later be known as CODIS. Sheila's just like staring at me. The Combined DNA Index System is what CODIS stands for. A national DNA database of offenders, missing persons, and forensic materials collected from crime scenes. In 1992, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld started the Innocence Project as a legal clinic at Benjamin N. Cardozo Law School. Since 1993, the Innocence Project has received over 50,000 letters from incarcerated individuals seeking help in proving their innocence. 50,000 letters. The Innocence Project conducts an extensive evaluation of cases to determine, number one, whether the identity of the perpetrator is at issue. Number two, whether the perpetrator potentially left behind biological evidence. And number three, whether the biological evidence was collected and what new testing may be conducted on the evidence. The viability of the person's innocence claim is also assessed. So, in the early 90s, as DNA testing was first starting to be used in criminal cases, the Innocence Project attempted to use DNA to prove Marion Coakley, a man from the Bronx who had been convicted of rape and robbery, innocent. The DNA tests were inconclusive, and they were actually able to prove him innocent by other means. preserved from the crime with a then emerging DNA technology known as PCR. I think we already talked about this. Polymerase chain reaction. I don't know if I'm saying polymerase correctly. It's been a while since I took AP biology, which I shouldn't have taken because I was bad at science. Anyway, the tests performed by Edward T. Blake of Forensic Science Associates in Richmond, California, established Bloodworth's innocence. After the FBI confirmed the results, Bloodworth was released June 28, 1993. He was the first U.S. death row prisoner to be cleared by DNA. In December 1993, Maryland Governor William Donald Shaper granted Bloodworth a full pardon based on innocence. 9 years later, in the spring of 2003, a Baltimore County forensic biologist who was studying evidence from the case found stains on a sheet that had not been analyzed yet. Investigators ordered DNA testing and ran the results through CODIS. And this linked Ruffner, Kimberly Ruffner, to the crime. Bloodworth, who had actually been the prison librarian in his later years of incarceration, had regularly delivered books to Kimberly, and the two had lifted weights together. I'm kind of confused as to why it was like a go-ahead thing. Maybe it's because it was death row, and very few women are on death row. Bye, Sheila. Okay, stretch it out a little bit. Ruffner arrived in prison just a month after Bloodworth and knew about Bloodworth's case, his attempts to win a new trial, and his claim of actual innocence. However, Ruffner said nothing to lead Bloodworth to suspect that she was the one who had killed Don Hamilton. Bloodworth learned the news from prosecutors shortly before Kimberly was formally charged with the crime in September 2003. The state of Maryland paid Bloodworth $300,000 for lost income, based on the rough calculation that he would have earned $30,000 a year for the years from his arrest to his release. Not everyone who is exonerated gets like a good amount of money, and to only compensate them for like salary and not emotional damages is insane to me. In 2004, the Justice for All Act authorized the establishment of the Kirk Bloodworth Post-Conviction DNA Testing Grant Program, which helps provide funding to states to help with the costs associated with DNA testing. So, that was the story of Bloodworth. Kirk Bloodworth. So, going back to the timeline, in 1998, CODIS becomes fully operational and available for labs across the country. I think we've talked about this before, but apparently it's not mandatory to enter information into CODIS for investigators. It's like a voluntary thing, and I don't know why that is. I'm sure there are a lot of reasons, but I can't think of a good one. But who am I, you know? Requirements include submitting a minimum of 13 unique individual DNA markers for human identification purposes. So in the year 2000, William Gregory becomes the first person to be exonerated by mitochondrial show-up procedure. Forensic evidence consisted of hairs found in the stocking cap worn and left behind by the assailant. The analysis of the hair was really bad. They just said it shared unusual characteristics with Gregory's hair and were more than likely from Gregory. That doesn't sound like a very convincing argument or case. The victim testified that she had not had any African American visitors in her apartment. The analysis testimony was invalid because there is not sufficient empirical data on the frequency of various class characteristics in human hair to determine that hairs are quote-unquote unusual. He was convicted and sentenced to 70 years in prison. Oops. He contacted the Innocence Project, and they located, preserved, and secured the hair evidence. The hairs were tested using mitochondrial DNA, which was new at the time. Initially, one hair was tested and excluded Gregory as a source. Before agreeing to release Gregory, however, the prosecution insisted that the rest of the hairs were tested. The state had the hairs tested at their own expense, and these results of further testing also excluded Gregory. He was released in the year 2000. He became the first person, like I said, exonerated by mitochondrial DNA testing. He served 7 years of his sentence and later filed a wrongful conviction lawsuit accusing detectives of withholding evidence of 2 other rapes in the area around the same time. The lawsuit against the city of Louisville and the state of Kentucky was later settled for a total of $4.6 million. Damn. Nice. With the city paying $3.9 million and the state $700,000. Good for him. Good for him. So, in 2002, my camera might be running out of batteries. Oh yeah, it definitely is. So we're just gonna try to go for it. In 2002, Paula Gray is the first woman exonerated by DNA testing. I'm going to quickly summarize that for you. So, in the morning of May 11th, 1978, Lawrence Lionberg and Carol Schmall were abducted from a Clark filling station where Lawrence worked in the mostly white Chicago suburb of Homewood, Illinois. The bodies of the recently engaged white couple were found the next day in an abandoned townhouse in mostly black East Chicago Heights. Both victims had been shot and Schmall had been raped. There was a tip from a man named Charles McCraney who lived near the murder scene, which led to the arrest of 4 African Americans: Pernille Jimerson, Dennis Williams, Kenneth Adams, and Willie Range. In addition, Paula Gray, a mildly intellectually disabled 17-year-old, was brought in for questioning. On May 16th, after being held without legal counsel for 2 days by Cook County, Gray confessed to the grand jury that she held a disposable cigarette lighter burning while Adams, Range, Jimerson, and Williams raped Schmall 7 times. She also stated that she saw Williams shoot both victims with a .38 caliber pistol. professions like that, and minors, let alone minors with intellectual disabilities being held and basically forced to confess, is so disgusting to me. A month later, on June 19th, Gray recanted her story, claiming that she had been drugged and that the police walked her around the crime scene and told her what to say. Since Jimerson was only implicated by Gray's recanted testimony, the charges against him were dismissed. However, Gray was charged with murder and perjury and brought to trial jointly with the 3 remaining male defendants. I'm getting emotional and angry right now, sorry. The trial was conducted before 2 juries, one for the men and the other for Paula. All 4 were convicted. Williams was sentenced to death, Range to life, Adams to 75 years, and Gray to 50 years. The convictions initially were affirmed on appeal, but Williams and Range won new trials in 1982 because the lawyer who represented them also represented Gray. Prosecutors made a deal with Gray that she would be released in exchange for testifying against Williams and Range at their retrial. As a part of the deal, Gray also agreed to testify against Jimerson, who was then charged. At his trial, a forensic scientist for the Illinois Department of Law Enforcement's Bureau of Scientific Services, Michael Podlecki, testified that the vaginal swab from the rape kit contained blood types A and O. The victim was type O, and Jimerson and Range were type O, and Adam and Williams were type A. He testified that Jimerson could not be excluded as a contributor to the swab, and noted that 47% of the population shared blood type O with him. However, this was misleading because the portion of the population that could not be excluded was greater than that. In addition to all men with type O blood, it is also included all men with type A blood and all type B and AB, and non-secretors, which I've never heard of, but men who do not secrete their blood type markers in their semen. Thus, the correct figure should have been closer to 80% of the population. Podlecki also testified that hairs recovered from the backseat of Williams's Toyota were consistent and similar to Lionberg's hair, one of the victims. About the comparison, he testified, "I could not see any differentiation in the characteristics. It was like I was looking at one hair." He also testified that hairs recovered from the rear floorboard and trunk of the car were similar to Schmall's hair, which is another victim. In December 1985, Jimerson was convicted and sentenced to death. 2 years later, on the basis of Gray's testimony and that of a jailhouse informant, Williams and Range were convicted a second time. Williams again was sentenced to death and Range to life. In 1995, the Illinois Supreme Court reversed Jimerson's conviction and ordered a new trial due to witness perjury. What a roller coaster of a ride. In 1996, DNA testing exonerated all 5 defendants and led to the arrests and convictions of the 3 actual culprits. A 4th one was actually deceased. In addition, Edward Blake, a forensic serologist and DNA expert, found that Williams was actually a non-secretor, which was contrary to the original testimony. Also, defense attorneys learned that within a week of the crime, U.S. history. Paula Gray, finally, on November 14th, 2002, received a pardon based on innocence from Governor George Bryan, which allowed her to receive $120,000 in state compensation. The Cook County Board settled the last remaining civil lawsuit and awarded Gray $4 million. Thank you. Good. I'm gonna keep going, but my camera might die, so there might have to be a part 2 of this video if you guys are interested. In 2008, the Innocence Project client Ricky Johnson is the first person exonerated by mini STR DNA testing, which allows labs to accurately test degraded or extremely small samples of DNA. Ricky Johnson served 25 years in Louisiana prison for a rape that he did not commit.